Hi everyone, this is my first video back from the How Canadian Government Works series, and I'm very happy to do this video on none other but the 45 minutes every Canadian loves daily called Question Period. So the first recorded oral question in the Hansard, or the daily proceedings of the House of Commons, to begin that little bit of history of Question Period, happened on November 29th, 1867, just days after the first Parliament met in Ottawa. By 1940, oral question was part of the daily proceedings of the Commons. But it wasn't formalized in the standing orders yet. A practice, wink wink, nudge nudge, in 1944 allowed for a question and answer, and then 3 supplemental questions be asked of the government during the daily proceedings by any member. In 1947, it was formally added to the daily program of the House of Commons under the words Inquiry of Ministers. In 1964, it was finally codified in the standing orders, almost 100 years after Confederation. The standing orders provided for a 30-minute period on Wednesday, but no time limits for the rest of the week, plus the daily adjournment debate. The rotation has changed a lot over the years. In 1979 to 1997, the rotation was the leader of the opposition for a question and 2 supplementals, then all the other leaders of the opposition parties for a question and 2 supplementals, then anyone who caught the eye of the speaker for a question and 1 supplemental. From 1997 to the present, it's been going through an order wherein the leader of the opposition gets a question and 3 supplemental questions. Then another opposition leader gets a question and 3 supplemental questions. The leader of the third party gets a question and 3 supplemental questions. Then the second representative of the third party gets a question and 3 supplemental questions. And finally, the leader of the fourth party and the other parties in the House of Commons would get a question and 2 supplemental questions. And then it would just repeat in the order which is determined by the party reps. So, in practice right now, Michael Ignatieff gets the first question, then 3 supplemental, then Bob Ray, or another representative, it's usually Bob Ray, gets a question, 2 supplemental, then Gel Duceppe, as the leader of the third party, the Bloc Québécois, gets a question and 3 supplemental, then second representative of the Bloc Québécois, and finally Jack Layton, or his representative, gets a question, 2 supplemental, and then the remainder goes in the order determined by the party reps. They usually is a limit on who can ask questions. Usually only private members may ask questions during question period. And question period is held Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 2:15, and finally Friday, because the House adjourns early on Fridays at 11:45. There's really 4 principles of question period. Time is sacred. Therefore, time should be used in the best possible ways and only on urgent matters during question period. A non-urgent matter can be taken up during the adjournment debate or during written questions. Members should be on the best possible behavior during question period, and I say the word should because the public's watching. The primary purpose of question period is to hold the government to account. Therefore, questions should be used to, hold the government to account. And members are given the greatest possible freedom to ask questions within these principles and the rules for question period when asking a question on subject matter. There are rules for the questions. First of all, like any statement in the House of Commons, it has to be addressed to the chair. You can't address it to another member of the Commons or address it to the public. Second of all, questions must actually ask a question. You cannot have 2 statements going back and forth. So question period, you actually have to ask a question in. Questions must be brief, short. Speaker is the sole judge of time, but usually it's about 30 seconds for a question and 30 seconds for an answer. and they must seek information within the profile of a current cabinet minister. So, for example, you cannot ask a former minister a question about their former cabinet profile. You can only ask for the current. Questions cannot be a statement. They cannot be hypothetical. They cannot seek legal advice or classified information. I'm not sure why they would. They cannot create disorder, and they cannot speak poorly of the Senate, the Governor General, the Queen, or any of the provinces. There is a second time when questions are asked in the House of Commons, sometimes lovingly called the Late Show, which is the adjournment debate. So the half an hour before the Commons adjourns every day, you see a mini question period go on. So you see a private member usually ask questions of a parliamentary secretary to a cabinet minister, and you see this go back and forth for half an hour. You have longer time limits, and usually no one watching, but you actually have very good policy discussions during the adjournment debate. So, what's the current state of question period? Well, if you've seen the news lately, not too awfully hopeful. Question period has been called by some an embarrassment. By others, it's been called a lot worse. So how do you fix this thing we call question period? A few different options out there. I've heard one person say, let's turn off the cameras for the 45 minutes a day we call question period and make reporters actually report on the policy discussions, and hopefully things will get civil. I think that's going back in time, and we can't do this. So there is another option, and Michael Chong, a private member of the Conservative Party from Ontario, has put forward motion 517, which passed in some form by the Commons and is now being studied by the Senate Committee on Rules. And basically what this motion would do is four things. Strengthen the role of the Speaker during question period. Lengthen the time limits for questions and answer. Direct ministers to answer questions within their portfolio, and devote specific days of the week to specific ministers. So, what does this mean? Well, first of all, if you watch question period a lot of the times, the answers and the questions are two separate things, and you wonder, how on earth can they answer that question with that answer? Well, this would say, let's make the speaker enforce that and make sure they answer the question. Second thing we'll do is lengthen the time limits for questions and answer. Right now it's about 30 seconds a question and answer. People have been saying maybe that's too short, maybe it's going to be a minute or so, minute and a half. So lengthen the time that you can have questions and answer. So let's create some real policy discussions here. Direct answers from the minister. So right now when you ask a question, you're actually asking it to the speaker, and any member of the government can answer a question. What is usually the case when you ask the Prime Minister a question during question period is it's usually another minister, usually the government house leader, that answers it. So they're saying let's change that and make ministers answer questions directed to them. The final thing they're talking about doing is it's devoting specific days a week to specific ministers. And they said the Prime Minister on every Wednesday and everyone else on a rotation. So right now the Prime Minister can be asked a question Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, whether he's in the House or not, whether he's in the country or not. So what this is doing is it's moving to more of a British model, where you have the Prime Minister have one specific day of the week to answer questions, and then you have everyone else this sort of fighting out for the rest of the day. Final thoughts. A few final thoughts. Question period is very important. Question period holds the government to account on a daily basis for the affairs of the nation. Therefore, it is utmost important. So how do you fix it? Well, honestly, I don't know. But I think we've changed the format of question period about once every 10 years or so. I think it's time to change it again. We have a new generation of politicians. It's time for a new generation of question period.